Morena, everybody. Great to see you. Welcome. I'll just ask you to pop your name and cluster number in the chat. That'd be fabulous, just to get a sense of where everyone is around the Motu today. And we'll make a start. Just got a few others popping in. Try and keep track of that. And I'll just open and then we'll introduce Sarah. Nā mihi o te rā, ki te whānau e hui nei, kia tau te rangi marie, kia whakatāpua tātou me ngā mea. E whakapunu ana tātou haumia, huiei tākie. Welcome. And I thought this is whakatauki from Dame Fenner that I think it's very close to my heart, and I think it's very appropriate for today. Take care of our children, take care of what they hear, take care of what they see, take care of what they feel, for how the children grow. So will the shape of Aotearoa. And I'm just wanting to do a little bit of housekeeping. If you could stay on mute, that'd be fabulous. We are recording today and we will share this with everybody. I think by the end you'll agree that it's a tonga to have Sarah with us today. Let's connect, inspire and uplift each other and be an active participant. So if you've got any gems or pārtai, we'd love it if you could pop them into the chat. And if we have an opportunity, I'm sure Sarah would love to be able to respond. And we will be keeping these as a record just to guide our planning going into 2026. Seems a bit trippy to be talking about 2026 and just about to put the Christmas tree up. So I'd just like to introduce myself. Kia ora koutou, ko Fiona Harkness-Saho. I'm a practice lead in Cluster 2 and kaiarahi for Aotearoa Aotearoa. And I was very lucky, very privileged to have done my first year training with Sarah. We won't mention how long ago. And I'm very, very happy to introduce Sarah today. I was just saying, I just loved, she was presenting at Natina in the conference and the break, and I just went, no, that's the real science of learning. That's what we need to be paying attention to. And I'm super happy and appreciative that you've joined us today from the other side of the world. So I'm just going to now, I'll stop share and I'm going to hand over to lovely Sarah Iono. Thank you.
Thank you. I'll just get you to allow me. Oh no, I've got it here. It's coming through,
Yep.
so that's good. So let me just see if that's going to work for you. Can everyone see that okay?
Beautiful.
Awesome. Okay. Well, kia ora koutou. It's lovely just to connect with you all. And as Fiona said, good evening from Wales. I'm currently in Barry, in about 20 minutes south of Cardiff, where I'm doing some work over here representing Aotearoa in Wales. Ko Sarah ai ono toki ngoa, e tipu ana hau I raro e te maunga a rongo kako, e te taha o te awa toki toki, e noho ana hau kei ahuriri, no reira tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou katoa. It's lovely to join you and to connect with. I always love working with RTLB because I connect with my people. I was an RTLB for over 10 years, and so it's always a feeling of coming home to talk to people who I know and understand the work that you do. So it's lovely to be with you today. I am hoping this is all going to work because I'm running off a little laptop in a little Airbnb kitchen, so we'll see how we go. As Fee said, I am very much hoping that this can be interactive at points. I've got a lot, as you can imagine, the neuroscience of play I could talk for days on. And I've got lots to share with you, but I have got a few slides along the way that hopefully we can have a couple of breakouts and we can do some questions at the end as well. For those of you that don't know me, I am currently the CEO and co-founder of Long With Education. We are coming up to our 10-year anniversary next year, having been operated in New Zealand now for that amount of time. And we started off as a little two-man band, my mum and I, just wanting to share the power of play with as many people who wanted to listen to what we had to say and our experience and our research around it. And we've grown significantly over that time. More recently, we've completed different research projects and publications, and also we are now working internationally. So, as I said, I'm here in Wales at the moment. I've been working in London last week, and we work in Australia and Canada, as well as do some work with some teams in India and in a wonderful school in Nigeria, in Lagos as well, which is really exciting to do too, and certainly a challenge to navigate some really interesting cultural differences there. I do lots, but I'm here today to talk to you about the connection between the research, the science, play pedagogy, and really why we need to have more play for our children, not less, especially in this time for our kids when life, the world, growing up is just so challenging. So let's dig straight into it. We're going to have in this session a little bit of stuff around the role of play in child development. We're going to talk about play as a natural context for learning, and that play is not a substitute or a nice easy time, and that we do play when we've done the hard learning, but actually that play is hard learning. It's actually the hardest form. It's just a little bit hard to measure and to count at times, and that's why we tend to shy away from it as educators and certainly as policymakers. But we'll talk about that. I'm going to talk about the intersection too of play and trauma-informed practices, because I think that's very relevant, particularly when we're looking at resiliency and growing resiliency in our children, growing that social and emotional connect, that ability to self-regulate and to have agency and empowerment over ourselves, and how play provides a natural curriculum, if you like, for growing those skills. I am going to touch briefly on literacy and numeracy in play. That is the elephant in the room. It always is wherever I go, is how we get play and literacy and numeracy all covered under the same roof. And I have some suggestions for that for you as well. And then we'll wind back to some Q&A time at the end if we have the time. So what I want you to do, first of all, I've got a little breakout, very brief one that I want you to just do a bit of a check on. In your cluster schools, I'd like you to have a think about this sort of barometer. Are you working in schools that are really locked in to a focus on the basics and structure? So in other words, really getting kids sitting down, reading, writing, maths, no more time for anything else, in schools that are feeling that pressure to really subscribe to that. Are you in schools where they might be doing that and play is a little bit, but it's rare? Then we get the occasional play. Maybe play is something that happens when all the hard work's done and there's a little bit of downtime. Then is play a regular thing, a regular feature. And when I talk about this, it's not play at morning tea and lunchtime. I'm talking about during contact time. So when children are in class, do they have play as an option as their regular part of their day? Or are you in schools where play is full permission? It is a part of the pedagogy, it's part of the culture of the school. And when you walk into those schools, there are children inside, outside, playing and interacting in all sorts of different contexts. So if you can think about that barometer, and I want you to think about that question around across the schools you support, where do you see the climate for play sitting on that barometer, and what patterns or barriers are you noticing? So is it possible for us to throw some people into breakouts to just have a quick chat about that, Fiona?
It is. I just realised I need to make sure you don't end up in one. So I'll just make you a co-host just to avoid that. And how long did you want?
Oh, look, it's just 5 minutes, just
Okay,
because we've got
cool.
lots to get through. It's just a very quick check-in as a barometer
Yes.
only.
Okay, I made a good guess. Right, there you go.
Wonderful. So 5 minutes. We'll see you soon.
And you can share that into the breakout if you want,
Okay. Um,
now that you're a co-host.
how do I do that?
Thing under share. Where is that setting? Assign to one. There we go. Cool.
Have you shared that or do I share that?
I
I'm not sure if
think
I
you do.
cast. Is it?
Yeah,
No,
it's in under the more, and then it should be share breakout.
I've got,
Should be there as an
I've got,
option.
oh, okay. Under more, share. Okay, spotlight is share.
It just says
Oh, shared
share.
breakout rooms. Yep,
Yeah,
got it.
cool.
Okay,
Magic.
that's
And they've got a
perfect. I can
60
use that
second
for.
timer to bring them back.
Cool. Okay, awesome. Okay. I've recognised a few names.
Cool.
Susan Armitage, that's one. Kieran Crawford,
Yes,
Elaine
she's been really
Ford.
supportive. We didn't get our networks of expertise funding extended, only the subject associations to drive the
Course.
changes to
Mm,
the year 11 to 13.
mm.
So,
Yeah, yeah,
mm,
yeah. Because you don't need any more professional development of any kind or any, you don't want people discussing things too much. You might kind of uprise.
yeah, yeah. No, so that was
Yeah, that's a shame.
wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, yeah. So we're just going back to the seams, but we're looking at how we keep the lights on.
Mm, yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah, it's
we've had amazing support from the CMs, which has been very cool.
good.
So it does look like there's some hope, which is, yeah, they've
It's
been
good.
great. And we've kind of, yeah, built a really good following now. So
Yeah, yeah,
mm,
yeah. Well, it's like anything, isn't it? That you want people to have access to good, robust discussions and knowledge and
exactly,
expertise. That's
exactly. And yeah, and
yeah.
that's the feedback we've been getting is that people have just really valued those opportunities to get across cluster and to see what's
Mm,
happening. And, we
mm,
kind of had been pretty siloed before the 40 clusters. Just
mm,
just didn't have that platform once we lost the association.
yeah. Which was not the intention of clustering in the way that it was it?
No,
It's supposed to bring
no.
everyone all together under one umbrella.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes. So, but yeah, I think we've got some good stuff happening, so that's cool.
yeah. Well, that's good.
Mhm.
Okay, well, what I'll be doing next, I've got one more breakout after this, about halfway down. Um,
And how long do you want that to be for?
I'll see how our timing goes,
Okay.
because I'd prefer to give more time to questions at the end.
Yeah,
Um,
brilliant.
so,
I'll leave it at 5, but I can quickly change it if you
yeah,
want.
yeah. Um, yeah, it's quite interesting. At this conference I was speaking at yesterday, the school that we were at uh, could have been a New Zealand school, just the way it was outside. And I mean, it was a old brick building, but just the way it just felt like a Kiwi school. And
Mm,
but he's very much an outlier. The leader said that he's in quite a wealthy area of where they are, and so all the other schools in the area come under a lot of pressure from the parents to get formal learning happening and none of this play stuff. Um, and it was like everything that was said. that we say in workshops that are the barriers, they are dealing with there exactly the same.
Wow. Wow.
So quite incredible. But he actually got uh, I think the recommendation or something when they had their inspection, and that worked really
Oh,
well apparently to their goals. So they were quite happy with that.
brilliant.
Okay, we're having everyone coming back in.
Sorry, Morena, I had to quit out. Morena, it's Donna
Mhm.
from Cluster 38. I had to quit out. Zoom was asking me for permissions, all sorts of permissions, so apologies
Oh,
for that. I'm in, back in now.
glad you're back. Regina and Jessia obviously Jess got lovely experience and she's a lovely year one teacher. She's now RTL being with us. She gets this stuff at a cellular
Good.
level. Her and Gina are obviously deep in convo.
We got everyone, just with everyone back.
Yeah, should have now. I think everyone's
Great.
back.
Okay. So I hope that you had a quick little chat with your group. And if you're able to, just as I continue on, I'll take a look at the chat again very shortly. But if you want to pop in just maybe a key theme that came out of the conversation in terms of that discussion around the barometer of your schools, your cluster that you're working in at the moment, I know that that will depend on the needs of the cluster. It will depend on the strength of schools, the strength of leadership, the want and desire and skills and expertise of teachers that you're working with. But just pop into the chat any particular themes that as a group you discussed and agreed upon that were key to thinking about that climate for play at the moment that may or may not be out there with the schools that you're working with. I'm going to carry on with the slides, but I'll come back to that chat as we move on. So let's just orientate ourselves to some good old-fashioned neuroscience. And in a basic way, what neuroscience comes down to when we think about learning is it comes down to three things: attention, focus, and memory. They are all controlled by our emotions, not our cognition. And I think sometimes when we think about neuroscience, we think about cognition, right? We think about the way we think, the thinking that goes on, the neuro stuff in our head, the brain stuff. But actually, what we know is that the majority of learning is associated with emotion, not cognition. So if we have that as our very basic premise to learning and successful learning, then we need to come at the pedagogy that we use in a slightly different way from maybe some of the rhetoric we're hearing around back to basics, right? Some of this basic stuff in the way that we learn. That we take away all that kind of soft, fluffy stuff and we just get on with the good stuff, which is the black and white cognitive stuff. And that just simply flies in the face of how we know the brain works. So I want to just unpack a little bit of how we know about, or what we know about the science of learning and the science of play, and how this kind of comes together when we look at the intersection of learning and emotion. So we're going to talk a little bit about the role of play in child development and learning, and go into this idea around the science of play, first of all. So when we look at all the research around the power of play, how children learn, what's happening with their brains when they're learning, when they're playing, there is decades and decades and decades of research on this. This is not anything new. And what I often say to teachers too is that actually humans were playing much longer than school has ever been invented, right? Play is the thing that humans have done for eons to make sense of the world around them and develop and evolve over time. We've done that through play, not through formalized schooling. Formalized schooling is a relatively new invention across the history of time. And so when we look at the idea of how our brains learn, adapt, take on new information, work things out, it has been always done through play. So what the research tells us very clearly around the brain, when we look at the role of play in the brain, is that the play engages really various areas of the brain and supports particularly the formation of connections between those areas and between brain cells. So in other words, it actually helps us grow that the path, right? The neuro path between different areas of the brain and different brain cells. And many of you will know that we have with brains that use it or lose it approach, right? That repetition is really important for the growth of those neural pathways. And play enables us in a controlled and usually safe way. Sometimes it's risky, but it's still safe, right? There's often not real world consequences when children are playing. And so we are able to practice and repeat, make mistakes, try again. And all of that helps grow those neural pathways. The more that we can do that, the stronger those neural pathways become. The other thing we know really clearly is that it stimulates the production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor, or BDNF. And BDNF is the substance that is essential for growth of brain cells and the connections between them. So BDNF is actually connected with this idea around our neurotransmitters, particularly things like dopamine, serotonin is another one. All of those neurochemical transmitters create our emotions first, not our cognition. And those emotions are the things that help us pay attention, remember things, and learn in the process. Not this idea of let's just sit you down and get some information into your brain and that's how you remember it. So there's been a lot of study around this. And a lot of information has come through in relation to the fact that, for example, when we've watched brains on fMRI machines, the mere fact that we are moving with play means that our brain is lighting up a lot more than when we are sitting in a sedentary position focused on one thing. And the more we're able to light up our brain through movement, again, that movement helps us remember things. There was a recent study out that said that if you're studying for an exam, that you need to do your study and then go and exercise for 20 minutes, literally straight afterwards, and it helps you retain that information. This is a study that they've done recently. So that idea that you don't just sit there and keep trying to pour all this information into your brain, you get out and you move and you do something different from the study, your brain is still working on consolidating that information into its long-term memory so that you're going to be able to retrieve it later. So this is where play helps our children do this. We can do some little short concentrated moments of teaching, but then allow children that moment of consolidation, of movement, of connection, and that helps that building in the cognitive area. So we know play literally changes neurons in the brain. We've been able to see this in brain imaging. In different research, they've found that in one particular research, and this has been done in animals, not in humans, but the researchers particularly said, look, there's no reason not to be able to correlate this because of the findings and the methodology that they've done. And this one particular neuroscientist from Washington State University, he found that in the animals that he tested, they had 1,200 genes that they were looking at, and a third of those genes were significantly changed within 30 minutes of play. So they literally were able to see the brains grow within 30 minutes of play. They've said again, there's valid reason to believe that this correlates with human brains as well, and how we can see that change as well, because the play is very similar across the species they were studying, and the uses of common rules and how humans play as well. We know that play develops dexterity and physical strength. Obviously, the more our children are moving, the more that they're going to develop their physical strength. They're going to be able to develop their sensory systems, their proprioceptor awareness, their vestibular systems, their interoception, their neuroception, along with the basics as well in the sensory system. But also too, we have seen that by developing muscle control and strength, they're actually also developing healthy habits as well, which then lessen the likelihood of things like childhood obesity, and it actually has been linked to instilling a passion for physical activity throughout life. So we're laying the foundation for healthy adults by allowing our children to move and be physically healthy in their youth as well. And our focus for this webinar around resilience, right? We know that play builds resilience or grit. There are skills and lessons in play that you simply cannot replicate in a formal lesson. You cannot replicate the moment where your friend says they don't want to play with you and that you need to leave them alone. You can't set that up as a little activity for it to really feel the way it would feel when your friend says, no, I don't want to play with you today. I'm playing with this person. Our children need exposure to that. They need to know that life is like that, and play gives us the curriculum to do that so that they are able to practice their skills in navigating situations like that. The same as if they fall off, out of a tree, for example. If they're climbing up a tree and it's not too high, but they fall out, they scrape their knee or they hurt themselves a little bit. And how do they manage that? Dare I say it, even if they break something, how do they manage that? Because again, we need those moments of lessons in life where things don't go as we would like them to go in order to be able to build resiliency. We need to have them in conflict in order for them to be able to learn how to manage conflict. We need children to experience disappointment in order to know how to manage disappointment. And unfortunately, if our children don't ever get experience with that, with the support of people around them that can then help them work it through, then they'll grow up. And when they first meet disappointment, it might be with much bigger consequences. And they may not have those skills as an adult to navigate it. So play provides that lovely curriculum in order to be able to do that. So that ability to have tolerable stress, which Catherine Burkett talks a lot about in the brain, tolerable stress is the thing that we need for our brains to grow and be resilient. Play allows our children to navigate complex social situations. And we know that the new circuits that play grows in the brain helps with this idea of social agility. It helps us being able to navigate different social situations, different people, different opinions, different ideas, different outcomes. That's our world. And we know that actually social skills are one of the greatest predictors of academic success, not grades. Research on elementary students in America who have strong emotional and social skills. Recently, they've identified that if these students have strong social and emotional skills, they're 54% more likely to earn a high school diploma, so graduate from high school. They're twice as likely to retain a college degree and 46% more likely to have a full-time job at the age of 25. So again, this is not looking at any grades, not looking at any learning outcomes. This is looking at what are their social and emotional skill sets like. And if they have good social and emotional skills, then they are going to be more successful at navigating the academic pathway and getting out into the workforce as a result. So it's not necessarily the academics that get us the jobs. That's a part of it, but we need the other stuff as well. So play is a natural context for learning and development. As I said, play has been around much longer than school. It will continue to be around in whatever version of learning is out there. Children continue to engage in play. However, it is under threat. It is not only under threat during the school day, but it is also under threat when it comes to our weekends with children, after school and so on. There are a multitude of things that are now impacting our children's ability to engage in play, which is why we need more play in a school setting, because many of our kids aren't getting it in their home setting. Unfortunately, some of the pressures that are coming that impact that ability for children to play is this age of rigor, this idea that we have to get things done. We have to get kids there, right? Wherever there is, we have to get them there. We have to make sure they're ready. We're not too sure ready for what, but ready. We have to make sure that they have got these outcomes that we want. And yet we do know from the literature that more often than not, when we push kids, when they're not ready, they actually turn out worse, not better for the kids, right? These kids actually turn off learning, they disengage, and they really struggle to make the kinds of progressions that our very good intentions are hoping to do by turning on the pressure a little bit more. We know that we've got schools at the moment navigating our policy direction that's happening in New Zealand at the moment around our hour of literacy and maths per day and the interpretation of that. I'm absolutely fine with an hour of literacy and maths per day because I know most of the schools that I work in with Play do far more than that in the day. They don't need to count an hour and make it up because their children are engaged in literacy all of the day in what they're doing, including explicit instruction as required. So we want to be able to start to see the learning as a process, not an output, because that's what learning is. But unfortunately, in this age of rigor, we are having to really focus on this idea of proof, and proving that children are learning. And sometimes when we narrow it down into proof, we simplify it to measure it. And learning isn't that simple. So we know that we're getting some interesting theories coming through as well at the moment around different types of and ways of learning. I know of one school that has recently adopted the idea that they will take everything off the walls because of cognitive load, and they will seat their children in an arrow formation with the children who are the lowest learners in the front, who need the most support, through to those at the back of the room who don't need so much support because they're okay. The children won't have any idea, of course, that that's why they're seated like that. They'll be oblivious to it, as we all know, the same as when we, name the lions and the seals, even though it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 group and we know who the fours are. That there's all of these kinds of different things coming out around how we will get more from children in their learning. And all of that, we have to keep asking ourselves, what do we know about how children actually learn? What does the research say really clearly? And that research has not changed. It is not faltered at all. In fact, it's doubled down a lot as we've got these other ideas that are sort of creeping in. So how do children learn? Well, one of the things that we know is that when we start to think about what's happening at the moment in some settings and a push for rigor, we are seeing a return to more traditional teaching methods, which often involves the teacher teaching to children, not working with children. So in other words, the children become passive in their learning. They sit there, they have to listen. And there's this idea that we're going to fill kids up because they come not knowing anything, and we need to get them to have all this knowledge and prepare them for the world, and so they can get out there and be knowledge rich, right? A lot of that passive listening then, I suppose, moves on to things like worksheets and written activities because we need kids sitting and doing all this work. It's very teacher-centred in terms of instruction. Children don't have a lot of agency at all. There's no room for them to be thinking for themselves or using their own brains. They are there to follow the teacher's brain and the teacher's instruction. And there's very much a focus on that short-term recall. What did we focus on quickly, bring it back, and so on. What we do know from the research is that actually the more active the brain is, the more likely they will be to engage and remember. So we actually need children to be in charge of their learning, to actually want to learn, rather than sit there and be passive recipients. Because again, remember that emotion is at the heart of learning, not cognition, not recall. So we actually need children to care and to be excited and engaged. And that's how they're more likely to want to learn and even learn the hard stuff, even understand that there are some things that they have to learn in order to get to the thing they want to learn. But they can manage that if they're actively engaged. We also know that we are not just a brain here, but we're a whole body. So we have to, in order to learn, we have to engage all the senses because our brain needs all that input in order to fully understand the world that we're navigating. And so we need to be able to feel, to taste, to touch, to smell, to see. One of the things I love to talk about with play is actually the feeling of interoception, that idea of knowing when things are starting to get a little wobbly, right? And I talk about this when maybe we're taking a bit of a risk with some play. Maybe we're getting up a bit too high in a tree, and it's our first time up, and we've climbed and we've climbed and we've climbed, and we start to get that butterfly feeling in our tummy. That feeling like, oh, I don't know if I can keep doing this. And that feeling that we get is a little kind of word to us to go, oh, just check and see how we're going. And that's a lovely little connection to our senses there, where our body's kind of going, oh, we're just kind of, taking a bit of a risk and we just want to check that this is going to be okay. And we have to learn to listen to that. If we don't listen to that when we're 5 or 6 or 7, how are we going to know what that feels like when we're in our teens or when we're in our 20s and we're doing something that has probably bigger consequences? So the idea of multi-sensory learning is important. We know that being spun upside down, swinging, we know swinging is so important for our sensory development. We also know that children learn best together. They don't learn in isolation. Humans don't learn in isolation. We are not that kind of species. Yes, there are times where we need silence and we need to work by ourselves, absolutely. But we also learn from others as well. And we also learn when we are in charge of our learning, when we can make decisions and we are agentic about our learning, that learning sticks much more. And of course, all of that then leads to our ability to have a deeper level of memory and transfer of that information into different contexts. If we are learning short-term information, we learn it for that moment that we need it, but we don't often retain it for deeper context. In play, we can often learn things in a deep way and then transfer that information into different contexts when we need it in other ways. So think about for a moment your own childhood. What do you remember learning? Do you remember the worksheets? Or do you remember the moments you were moving and making and playing? Right? I can remember a very vivid memory I have actually is when I broke my arm at school. I don't really remember much about being in the classrooms. I remember my teachers because I mostly had nice teachers most of the time. But I do remember breaking my arm on the school tyre swing because the boys were swinging it far too high. I got scared and jumped off, and I landed with my wrist on a root of the tree, and I broke my arm. And I remember that because I had to have the ambulance called at the school, and then I also had a grapefruit milkshake for breakfast at the hospital the next morning. That's what I remember, right? It's those things that we remember, those little moments. I also know now that you don't jump off a really cool swinging tire swing. You use your language. You say, hey guys, slow down. This is scary, right? Or don't get on if you don't want to play with the big kids. So there's lots of learning that comes from that. We don't remember the worksheets, right? So we have to be able to make learning memorable. So rigor without play, I would argue, is compliance, not learning. We are teaching our children to comply and follow instructions and do what they're told, but we're not actually asking them to engage in learning. We're not asking them to think for themselves. We're asking them to comply and regurgitate. And we have to really ask ourselves, is that the generation we want? Do we want a generation of children that come through and can't think for themselves, can only regurgitate information? Or do we want critical thinkers? And I can tell you certainly on the international global education stage, this is not even a conversation. The idea of the basics of literacy and numeracy is not even in the conversation. The conversation at an international stage at the moment is how do we grow our children's critical thinking? How do we grow their creativity? And how does that all impact their ability to navigate a world with AI, right? Because that's the big topic within the international sector at the moment. So we need to be really pushing back on this idea that rigor does not mean a narrow view of learning, but we actually need our children engaging in multisensory, active, engaging, agentic, child-driven learning, because those are the things that grow those very dispositions that we need for the future. So my next breakout question for you is, where are the pressures for compliance or rigor strong practices? Because I think this is a really relevant one, and I know particularly for RTLB, the idea of understanding and responding to trauma, and the impact of trauma on some of the children that you'll be working with and the whānau that you're supporting is very topical right now. So let's have a little look at some of these trauma-informed practices and how they align with play. So first of all, we know that safety is the biggest, one of the biggest trauma-informed practices that we need to be aware of. Children need to feel safe. They cannot, if they don't feel safe, they are not going to learn. We know that. No one can learn if they feel unsafe. And I think sometimes when we think about play, we think of play as quite chaotic, loud, noisy, messy, and maybe potentially unsafe. But we do know that when we take a view of play as a pedagogical tool and it's aligned with trauma-informed practices, then we know that within a play space, we still need a sense of safety. We need to know that our children are not going to be pulled into a stress response, that actually play and connection and movement can bring them back to a calm, alert state, right, where learning is possible. So to do that in a play space, we still need predictable routines. So it's not a free-for-all. It's not for kids to just go and play all day and go wild and be sort of like Lord of the Flies and anarchy. We need a routine every day. And we talk a lot about having a rhythm in our play space. This idea maybe that the timing of things sometimes is a little different and we're flexible, but the rhythm is the same. So there are predictable routines. We know that when we come in, that we can go and play straight away, that there are things out that we go to that are always there for us to be able to play with, and we can go and play with them. We know that at a certain time in the morning, the teacher will call us all down onto the floor and we'll do karakia, or we'll do a story or a waiata or whatever our morning routine is. That's part of our routine of the day. It's not necessarily that it will happen at exactly 9:05 every day, but that the routine will be there and it will be predictable. We also know that there are clear expectations. A play environment still has rules, it still has consequences, and we still are very clear around how we are treated in that room and how we treat our things in that room. And so that sense of safety is held together because we have these clear expectations. And obviously, naturally, from that, there are natural or logical consequences if those expectations are impacted. And then any behaviour management approaches that we implement are developmentally responsive. They are not punitive. They are matching where the child's at, and they are seen as part of the teaching and learning, not the punishment, which aligns obviously with trauma-informed practices as well, serving to understand behaviour rather than to punish it. We know, I love this proverb, it's not a nice proverb, but we love it. The child who is not embraced by the village will burn it down to feel its warmth. And we know when we are in a play space that sometimes our most difficult children do not necessarily engage willingly or positively in play to start with, because they don't feel safe in their village. And what they do is they go around and they destroy and they interfere and they mess with other kids' play. They break things. That is not a sign that that child shouldn't have access to play. That is a sign that that child needs more play. They need more time to learn that their village has got them, and that no matter what, they are embraced by their village. And they don't need to burn it down in order to feel warm in that space. That's really hard I've been in that space as a classroom teacher. It's really hard, but the alternative is not going to teach that child safety. It's going to teach that child that they need to um, they need to be controlled and managed rather than having the faith that they can manage themselves in a space where they feel loved and warmth of their village. So that is often where we need to spend more time with those children. We need to coach other children to be able to manage that child is learning that they are accepted and loved in the classroom village. Just a word on trust. I was at a conference a few years ago, an international play conference in Glasgow, and they had a wonderful speaker there called Dr. Adam Burley, and he was a psychologist. Actually, I think he was actually Scottish, but he'd spent a lot of time in New Zealand. He'd actually worked with the All Blacks and things like that. And he talked about overcoming trauma and adversity and the importance of play for humans. And what he said was that if you consider that relationships are as important as breathing to humans, we need relationships in order to survive. And if our early relationships are run through with trauma or neglect or mistreatment, our innate ability to play is impacted, right? We can't breathe the same way than if someone had not had that experience in their early years. So we have an internal world that has judgment, anxiety, and conflict that often reflects outwardly in play, right? So this is where we see some of these more challenging behaviors because our relationships are impacted. In fact, trauma causes what they call a severe relational injury. We choke in relationship with others if we've had that trauma. And that's life limiting, right? It can be catastrophic for some people. It prevents us from not being able to play and in turn not being able to discover who we are. Because play is the thing that helps us discover who we are. It helps us discover what we like, what we don't like, what we'll put up with, what lights our fire, what the world is around us. All of these things help shape us, and it helps shape us through play. So when people like this doctor use treatment in response to trauma, what they do is they often focus on, rather than recovering from trauma, they focus on discovering people's selves again through play. And they use play to inherently discover the new self, right? Because it's never going to be the same self as before the trauma, but who is this new person now as a result of the trauma, and how do we walk through life? So play assists children to find out who they are, what they are enjoying, what they're good at. In non-trauma impacted children, self-discovery comes when they have that relational capital. They've got capital to be able to be in relationship with others, and that happens often in play. But for students who don't have that, they've got a really limited capacity to play. They don't have that relational capital. They don't have a secure play base. So relationships are at the heart of play. And if kids have learnt that adults are not to be trusted, then they won't learn. And often he also talked about this idea that trust can only be a second language to children when their early years have been devoid of it. I think that's really powerful. He talked about a client that he had who, for years, he thought he wasn't going to get through with this woman, and she was a young person when she started working with him, and for years he worked with her. And in the end, she trusted him, and she explained that trust was a second language to her, that she was never going to have the innate ability to trust, but she had learned to trust again as a second language. And I thought that that was a really powerful way of looking at it. So when we're working with children who have been impacted by trauma, they are learning a second language. And again, how do they do that? They do that through play. They do that through feeling safe and being able to interact and try things out again. So play in itself is the second language for many of those children. So it is in playing, and David Winnicott says this beautifully, it is in playing and only in playing that the individual child or adult is able to be creative and use the whole personality. And it is only in being creative that the individual discovers the self. So if we are going to help children who have lost relational capital, who have lost themselves because of something that's happened to them, how do we help them find themselves again? It's about them being creative, and they are able to be creative and play and learn to discover themselves again. And that's really, to me, the heart of what learning is to learn who we are. And to me, that's the science of learning right there. So that's the beautiful connection at the very heart of safety and play. The next one I want to talk about is obviously from that is connection, right? We know, as I've just said, trauma can disrupt children's relationships. We know that trauma-informed teaching emphasises that importance of supportive, stable relationships and being in relationship with children. And so, again, in a play space, we focus on how do we build those relationships? Well, we know that we want teachers to truly see children, to have time to notice their children, to learn about their children, to learn what their children's interests are, and to be able to respond to those interests and help grow them and not diminish them because we've got a curriculum that we have to get on with. I'm not even going to call it a curriculum, I'm sorry, I'm going to call it a syllabus. We've got a syllabus to get on with because you can't call it a curriculum at the moment, and be able to actually spend time in conversation with children and learn about conversation promotes that connection. And that's really important, that idea of manaakitanga whanaungatanga, tuning in to where our kids are at and responding to their needs. In an age of rigour, that's often one of the first things that goes. And I know when I'm just looking at some of the chat comments earlier, one of the challenges that you're noticing is teachers being in play and working in alongside children and having time to notice what children's interests are and what they're doing in their play. That is the key to connection in a play-based learning environment. How do you know how to respond to what your children are doing? How do you know what they're interested in learning about if you're not there watching and listening? So it's really important to have that time for connection. So what does it look like? Adults in the play. This is not a hands-off approach pedagogically. Many of you will have heard varying views about what play is, play-based learning. What I'm talking about is play as a pedagogical tool, which is different to free play or pure play. Free play is super important for our children, and they are not getting enough of it, but we can't justify the use of free play in a school context. We can't say to kids at 9 o'clock, see you at 3, have fun, right? Because we'll all probably lose our jobs. But we can use play as a pedagogical tool. But the art of that is not using play as a Trojan horse, not having things as playful activities where the teacher's still well in charge of it, but truly understanding play as a pedagogical tool is about knowing that we put the agency and the drive in our children to engage in things they're interested in, and we are along for the ride, and we are there supporting, scaffolding and guiding. We do this through giving positive feedback, growing social and emotional skills, connecting to the curriculum, connecting to new learning, working in the zone of proximal development. There's a whole load of strategies that teachers do, and it's the real guts of the work that I do with teachers is how does that look? What do they do? We ultimately use notice, recognise, respond as a framework. We notice what children are trying to do, what their inquiries are in play, what they might be testing out, what they're interested in. We recognise that against the curriculum, so we know where it sits, what kind of learning they might be doing, whether it is academic in terms of the learning areas, whether it is social, emotional, dispositional, key competencies, whatever. And then from there, we plan our response. So we are planning, we are teaching, but we're doing it in this cyclic way. We also are tuning in to our children in their non-verbal cues. This is where connection's really important. What are our children not saying that they need from us? And play helps us see that in a much, much bigger way. But we have to actually be there and be listening and not distracted from and doing other things. Play, safety and resilience. We know that with trauma-informed practices, we need children, as we've talked about, to be in a safe space. When they feel that they're in a safe space, they start to take risks. So they start to experiment when they feel safe. They start to provide multiple different responses. They build that emotional flexibility. So they experience all different kinds of emotions in play, and they have to learn how to regulate that. So that's sometimes where you'll get students that will be too much. They won't know how to regulate their feelings. They won't know how to be really excited, and they might end up being really silly. Or they won't know how to manage their frustration, and they'll have a full-on meltdown. Rather than seeing that as something to manage, we see it as a wonderful learning opportunity, because children need to have these experiences to learn how to manage them. They can't learn them any other way. So if we can start to reframe that we want these experiences for children so they can learn in the safety of the classroom, where they have these connections and that they're loved and cared for, then they're going to be able to manage it when it gets a bit harder out in the real world. So because of that, they'll develop these ideas of grit and perseverance and problem-solving skills, because there's lots of trial and error in play. And all of that helps wire the brain. It helps children learn that they can adapt and recover and grow. And particularly for our children who have experienced trauma, it gives them a sense of empowerment that they've got this, that there's something in control that they've got in control, that they're not sort of at the mercy of people around them. So what does this look like? First of all, we love mistakes in a play space. We love it when things go wrong, right? We love it when there's a disaster. In fact, I'd much prefer a disaster where we can all kind of go, oh no, that's not what we planned, because that's a learning moment instead of it always going according to plan. And because of that, we do lots of problem solving teaching, lots of what are we going to do now? What's the next thing we're going to try? And the teacher will always be modelling and using positive feedback to strengthen mana, to really looking at the heart of children, going, hey, you've got this, you're good at this, right? Even if we think, oh my gosh, how are we going to solve this problem? That's all right, we got it. Okay, and creating that sense of self-belief. And then highlighting and valuing diverse strengths and expertise. One of the things that I work on with teachers a lot, and actually in the research that I was involved in for my doctoral work, it was a skill that the teachers didn't do without specific PD, without specific coaching, is that they didn't promote the expertise of other children in the room. And we had to actually highlight that as a practice we wanted the teachers to work on. They didn't say things like, I can see you're having trouble building that tower and it keeps falling over all the time. You know, Jack over there, he's a really good tower builder. And I bet if you go and ask him, he might have some ideas about how to keep that tower from falling down all the time. Or this person over here is really good at folding paper just right to get the lines right so that you can get that structure how you'd like it. Go and check with them, right? Promoting the expertise. And I would love for a classroom for every child to be an expert in something, right? Whether it's shoelace tying, whether it's organising the lunch boxes, whatever. But we all should have an expertise, and it all should be highlighted in the classroom, so that we can see that we're all good at something, and that literacy and numeracy aren't everything when it comes to expertise. So that leads us to empowerment. How do we do this? Well, we know that we need students to feel a sense of empowerment. Children that have experienced trauma obviously feel powerless a lot of the time, and that's often when they seek out some kind of power, potentially in not very easy ways to manage. So we know that we want to be able to give children back a sense of power within the realities of a classroom. So the way that we do that is by enabling children to have a sense of autonomy and responsibility. So using that notice, recognise, respond approach actually helps us manage our response with student ability and confidence. So what does that look like? Letting children try first. Basically shut up as a teacher and let a child give something a go. Even if you think it's going to fail dismally, right? Or even if you think that there's a chance that they're not going to do it right, let them go for it, because they actually have to have the confidence to give it a go first, even if it's not going to work. Share responsibility. One of the things I often say to teachers is, The more work your brain's doing, the less your students' brains are doing. We want their brains to be working, not yours. So you don't have to solve this problem. They do. Put it back on them. It's their responsibility. You're there just to guide the conversation and to guide the thinking process, but you don't have to solve it. And celebrate again those diverse talents, right? This is an empowering place to be, is when you can say, I am the expert in sandpit tunnel digging in this classroom. That is my expertise. Come to me anytime you need to know about sandpit tunnels and how to keep the structural integrity of those going when the water's in the sandpit, right? The puff up of the chest when that happens is really real for our kids. So again, we want to come back to that idea of empowerment for our kids as well. And then I've crossed this out because we talk about cultural sensitivity in trauma-informed practices, but we actually want to talk about culturally sustaining practices, things that sustain and empower our connection with our own culture. And we know that there's an intersection between trauma and culture and race and ethnicity. We know that we've got, you know, higher representation of populations in certain communities with trauma. And we know that equally we want play environments to enable children to express their cultural values and practices and for them to lean in to who they are and all of who they are. They don't need to leave part of them at the door in order to be able to be in the school space. So it does mean that educators really have to have informed knowledge of both trauma and culturally sustaining practices. So again, there's that intersection. And then there needs to be an intersection of play pedagogy as well. And just to share with you a case study that's going to be the research I'm waiting to go any day on the TLRI site. We've just finished publishing our research after a 2-year project based in Hawke's Bay. And I've just published on SET as well. So if you have access to SET, it's in the latest November edition of SET. But we have just completed a case study looking at culturally sustaining play practices. And we propose that play is to be seen as a kauwaka or a vessel for belonging and whakapapa and tikanga. And so we worked with kaiako to shift their practice using the play-based learning observation framework, which has been adapted for this project. And the research was really, really clear. We interviewed all the mokopuna involved, 130 odd kids were involved, and from that research we saw that they had increased agency, there was richer oral language, and there was a visible pride in cultural identity. But some of the outcomes from that research included the fact that many of the teachers we were working with, despite the high population of Māori and Pacifica students in the research, we had mostly non-Māori teachers. And so again, the support needed to be there for non-Māori teachers and our Māori teachers because of translation in terms of hapu, mātauranga, iwi mātauranga, and different interpretations of tikanga. What does that all mean for play? What does it look like when children are playing? So it was a really interesting piece of research that we did there. So have a look at I won't go into all of it now, but have a look at the article in SET, and we'll be sharing very soon, as soon as I know it's up on the TLRI site, the full research report that's come from that as well. So just for you to have a think about as we go into the last part of this webinar, in a world of standardization, when there is this current push, which I'm absolutely certain will not last, it can't last because it doesn't have the evidence behind it to support it. In a world of trying to all be the same and do all the same thing, how can we provide space for learners to express themselves, their whakapapa, their whānau knowledge, and their community stories in their own unique ways? And the way that we know children do this best is through their play. It is how that they express how they live, they practice how they live, they practice what they see in the world around them. I've seen beautiful play. I had a teacher describe for me some play she observed, and they weren't aware at the time, but they were watching some children who were almost running like a tangi. and they just were watching from afar, and they were trying to work it out, but it was this tangi that they were going through. But they were practicing a funeral for a baby. And she didn't realize at the time, but one of the mums in the room had lost a baby. And that's how they worked it out, was the children were working through the tangi of this baby that had died in the whānau. That's how they try and make sense of things. There is historical records of children who survived the Holocaust and of the play that they engaged in while they were in concentration camps. It wasn't pretty play. It wasn't sunshine and rainbows and flowers. That's not their world at that time. But that was the play they were doing to try and make sense of their lives at that moment in time. So how can we have classrooms and play spaces that enable children to explore the world and make sense of it and write this narrative that they're trying to write in their heads? Really important to keep that going. And I am really hopeful, because I think that we are at a time where schools are really pushing back on this, and certainly the schools I'm working in are not letting this one go very easily. So I'm pleased about that. Just moving on, I just wanted to touch briefly on play pedagogy, the elephant in the room, which is our literacy and numeracy and coverage and structured literacy and explicit instruction and direct instruction, all those sorts of things coming together. Because many people believe that play pedagogy is in opposition to structured teaching and explicit instruction, and that is not correct. Free play is in opposition to structure, but play pedagogy works in tandem with this for a very important reason. I want to show you this diagram, and for anyone who's listened to me talk before, this will not be unfamiliar to you, because I put this in front of everyone I possibly can, because I think this sums up perfectly what we're trying to say here. What I'd love for this diagram to actually be is like a bell curve rather than a continuum. So if you can imagine a bell curve imposed over the top of this. At the very end, we've got highly structured. So that's our really chalk and talk kind of lesson, right? At the other end, we've got unstructured, which is our really free play, out there, hanging out with mates, not an adult in sight, doing all sorts of risky things we shouldn't be doing, right? At the extreme. If we see this at a bell curve, those two things are at the extreme ends of that bell curve. They still exist. They're still important for our children and for learning, but they are not the predominant ways in which we learn. I like to think of those two things happening within a school context, because this can all happen outside of school as well. But within a school context, I like to think of that highly structured stuff as happening probably only really when there's an emergency, like an evacuation. That's not the time that you're going to say to children, you choose, it's up to you whether you want to leave or not. But I'm going to evacuate. Anyone who wants to come with me, you can come. But hey, I respect your agency. If you want to do your own thing, that's fine too. That's not the case. In a school setting, you're the one that's in charge at the end of the day, right? You're the one that's in charge of safety. So in a highly structured situation, that's it. We're out. Do as you're told. Way down the other end, free play, I would probably start to think that we're in week 8 of term 4. We're probably starting to see a little bit of free play starting to creep in now, as everyone's getting a little bit tired. I know reports are done for many teachers. I know that there are some classrooms being shifted. There are some resources starting to be catalogued and going back. We're probably getting a little bit loose, right? We kind of hold it together, but we're a little bit more laissez-faire when it comes to the teaching and play. Or it might be week 10 of term 3, might be another one. Or the day after school camp when we're all tired and we've got, half a day to go before the weekend. That kind of thing, right? We might have that happen, but it doesn't happen very often. What we want is the concentration of our time to be in these two ones in the middle. We want focused learning, which is where I see structured literacy and explicit instruction happening, and child-centered play. I kind of look at that as a little bit like a wobbly stool, because it's never going to be just one or the other. It's going to feel like you're sitting on a wobbly stool all the time, right? Sometimes you're going to wobble over to the structured literacy and you know you've got to get through some explicit instruction and you've got to do these specific teaching strategies that we know are important for literacy learning, but it's not at the expense of other forms of learning, such as child-led learning, where as a teacher we need to be in there supporting children to develop their agency, their curiosity, their creativity, and so on. So we are constantly in a wobbly situation in the middle here. I put structured literacy in the focused learning section because you'll see there that it says playful experiential activities. To me, structured literacy should be playful and experiential. If it is not, then it sits in the highly structured, which we know is not effective. And that will come down to the provider and the program that schools are working with. So we know that there are programs out there that call themselves structured literacy and not, but we would expect that a component of good structured literacy practice involves play, playful experiences, moving and learning, because that's how the brain works. So we want to be in that space all the time. All right. So just to clarify, it's not the absence of structure and explicit instruction. It is the wobbly stool of both. That is play pedagogy as the umbrella of the process. So to demonstrate that, we've got our Scarborough reading rope here. And this is a really useful slide just to have a look at, because I think sometimes when you think about literacy, we focus a lot on this part, right? And we hear a lot, and I think that that's where a lot of people think, who are not educators, think this is reading, right? If they can decode, if they've got their phonological awareness, they know their words, they're readers. And we know that's not the case. That's just part of it. We also have to have all of this too, and we can't teach this necessarily explicitly. This comes through immersion in language, and particularly in oral language, a lot of this grows. And so on the left here, we've got the two parts through a play lens. So again, if you think of that bell curve, we've got our structured learning down here. So we have our small group instruction and explicit instruction here. But then we have our play up here, because our children need to apply their literacy knowledge in play. They need to practice their vocabulary. They need to be able to explain themselves and communicate to others. And so they have to be able to use new vocabulary. They need to be able to explore language structure and so on. They need to be able to reason with people, right? And then finally, they need to be able to apply a whole lot of different print concepts and genres in play. I've sat there and worked with children who have had to learn how to write a menu as opposed to an email, as opposed to a sign, as opposed to, what's another one that they've been doing recently? Paper money, right? What goes on to money? What's all the literacy there? So there's a whole lot of literacy knowledge that is developed through play. So they work together. They don't work in isolation. And here's just another more recent piece of research. And I was made aware of this actually in some work I was doing in Canada when I was sharing the Scarborough reading rope, and I had someone come up to me afterwards and say, are you aware that the people that created the Scarborough reading rope are a little bit concerned with how it's being interpreted so in such a black and white way by some of our policymakers, because we know that actually there's more to it than just these things here in the middle, that we need to have this here first before our children engage in this. And this to me makes so much sense, because you can't tell me that a child who arrives, who can't sit still, who can't focus and has no interest in anything written, just needs to sit for longer to learn to read, right? We actually need to have some active self-regulation in order to be able to engage with literacy and print concepts. And that's done through the development of executive function. It's done through this idea of being a motivated literacy learner, an engaged literacy learner, and then having some strategies, knowing that that squiggle on there is a word and it might be interesting. So tell me more about it. So to be able to have some of that. So Duke and Cartwright came up with this diagram. You can Google their work online, and they said, well, look, let's focus on this as well as these things here, which then creates the readers that we want. So again, play sits here and amongst all of that, as well as language comprehension. So I've whizzed through that last part. I'm just going to sit back into the chat there, looking at some of the barriers and things like that, but I'm absolutely open to any questions or comments now that people might have around what I've shared so far. I'm just having a little quick look at these comments here. Pressures around assessment. Oh, yes, Kieran. Referral for behaviour. That's still a problem, huh? That's a problem when I was an RTLB. Come in and fix it. You guys are the miracle fixers, aren't you? You can go and just fix children and they'll be fine. Lots of our neurodivergent learners as well. So I just want to address quickly some of the barriers that came up in our first breakout session. First of all, yes, there is a difficulty in getting play to move further up the school. It is seen as a junior thing for a lot of our teachers in New Zealand. Not in all schools. There are a number of schools that have play going right the way through, right up to year 8 for some of our full primaries. It is a challenge for teachers to understand what play looks like for older kids, and that is really where schools need professional development to unpack that and work with teachers to understand the evolution of play, and particularly how play grows and develops as children develop. But equally too, understanding and watching children from a developmental lens to know that you might be 10 or 11 or 12, but the play that you're involved with is actually more developmentally at a 4 or 5-year-old level. So how do we respond to that? So not seeing children chronologically, but starting to see them where they're at developmentally and what that means for their play and for their learning. Lots of comments around the pressure of delivering the new curriculum in literacy and maths, absolutely. Play occurring as part of a rotation, yeah. Again, more stuff around juniors. Lots of talk there around the staff with no training, and obviously play happening, but teachers not really knowing what their role is. So the work that we do is based very much on the outcomes of the research that I've been involved in over the last 10, 15 years around what supports teachers need in order to be able to implement play pedagogy with fidelity. And it's really, really clear in the research. I feel like I keep banging the drum at the moment, as teachers can't do this without support, because we need to be able to help teachers look at what children are doing, understand play, and learn how to be responsive in their teaching. The traditional way that we're trained is not the way that we teach through play. And if we apply that to a play setting, then yes, we're not going to get outcomes that play will give us. And often play is the thing that gets blamed, and that's not actually the case. There's also conflict around play and literacy learning and things like that. And so again, when we see literacy outcomes being questioned, it's because of that play. That's the problem. And actually, more often than not, it's the quality of the literacy instruction that's the problem, not the play. But play's the easy thing to blame because it's the new kid on the block, and kids all look a bit wild. So they mustn't be learning. So there's definitely a need for professional development. And if anyone's interested in learning more about that, you can go on to our website, pblot.com, pblot.com. And that's the work that I do internationally and in New Zealand, implementing the PBLOT framework. And if you read the SET article and the TLRI project that we've just wrapped up, we have now an Indigenous play framework that is the second version of the PBLOT that's come out, and that's a framework that supports culturally sustaining play practices within New Zealand schools as well. And it's very much a very structured professional development approach to growing teachers' pedagogy with that. We have great results with it. But it's just about getting schools to understand that you can't learn this by going to one workshop and then going back and trying to apply it back in the classroom. It's such a complex pedagogy that teachers need support to do it properly. What else have we got here? Pressure with assessment and policy, absolutely. Social and emotional teaching, yes. I was an IYT facilitator and peer coach, and that's what led me to play when I was doing that 10 years ago, because to me, social and emotional coaching is actually more important than any other teaching that we do. And at the time, this was during national standards, and again, we had teachers that were just trying to get their kids to green, and they couldn't find time to do any social and emotional coaching. And I was being called in as an RTLB to fix behaviour. And we just know we're going to see more and more behaviour challenges the more we double down into a very narrow teaching and assessment lens with literacy and numeracy. We know our children who are trauma impacted. We know our children who are neurodivergent. Anyone who's even a little bit different is going to be impacted by a very monosyllabic version of teaching, and we need different. So we need brave teachers to go, yeah, we can still teach. We can still teach literacy and numeracy. We've got that, but that's not the most important thing. We need to actually address the whole child. And we will get the outcomes for literacy and numeracy if we teach this way. We just have to have faith that we're going to do that. Any other questions?
I'll just jump in. Kieran's made
Yeah.
what I think is a brilliant suggestion, is that I think we need you back next year to continue this corridor. So
yeah, I'd love to share the research that we've been involved in much more detail.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I think if we don't have any more questions, we might just close. And so perhaps if you just pop off sharing your screen.
Oh, I've just got one slide to share, just this
Magic.
last one here, very quickly, because this is something that's close to my heart. I'll just get rid of everything else that I've got here. Obviously, there are a whole lots of different types of trauma that people experience, and I don't want to devalue or diminish the impact of any of those, but largely absent from the discourse around childhood trauma is school trauma. And we don't actually register that school can be a place of chronic sustained trauma for children. It can lead to complex PTSD, and that a traumatic time spent at school can and does break people. So we need to be very clear going forward, particularly at the moment with some of the policies that are being put into place, that these policies will cause trauma for children, and we need to be speaking up and advocating for those children as much as we can. So we need those places of safety. We need pedagogy to align with how children learn. It must align. And at the moment, the pedagogy that's being promoted does not align. It will cause harm. And that's really important. So I will leave that with you there. And I will stop share. Yep.
Wonderful. I just cannot thank you enough, Sarah. Your corridor, your whakaaro, you've touched on so many really important aspects. I mean, the trauma-informed is very dear to my heart. There have been a couple of light bulb moments where I've gone, okay, and this is a confession time, where I can tend to see that opportunity for a break as a chance for a child to decompress, but not about what they are then doing in that moment. So as a reward or a brain break, but I need to get a whole lot more intentional about what's happening in those. That's the learning. That's where the real learning is occurring. And so thank you. And you'd mentioned this, Tina, and that absolutely for me, I think just holding on to, if they're having challenges in that moment, they don't need less play, they need more.
Yes.
And How
Yes.
often do we see our kiddies who are on shortened days? They're not allowed out, to have those interactions at break times. So let's scaffold that a bit and be present with them and give them more
Mm,
opportunities, not less. So,
mm,
it's just so many gems. Thank you so much. And I'd love to get you back because I think this is a really important conversation for us to be having.
mm.
Just a reminder for everybody, this will come out in the slides, RTLB Aotearoa, Connect, Inspire and Uplift. We're working on some great plans for next year. And don't forget, if you're not on our Facebook group, that's a closed group for RTLB, and that's that chance to really share with your colleagues. Encourage you to jump on. And I'll just close. Kia tau te manaakitanga, ki runga, ki tēnā o tātou. Kia piki tō te ora.